are watching Simon Says on Mtgo Academy featuring Simon Götzen.
Hello and welcome everyone, Simon Götzen here recording Simon Says for mtgoacademy.com. I'm busy drafting Journey into Nyx, Born of the Gods, Theros Limited, and in my opinion this format has really come together with the third set. I'm usually more of a fan of drafting the single set draft formats, for example Theros, more than Born of the Gods, Theros, or even like in core set draft, which not a lot of people do as much as I do. However, with Journey into Nyx, I now think that the format really works as intended. You don't have to be too afraid of the absolutely crazy, unfair things happening. You have a bit more time to put your plan into action, and that makes all the difference because you aren't getting punished for being on the draw. You aren't being punished for with ordeals. You aren't being punished by heroic plus bestow so often, but instead you will have a fair chance of interacting with these kind of cards and with the things that your opponent is doing. I really think that the full block format is one of the best limited formats of the last years, and I wasn't the biggest fan before Journey into Nyx was released. So of course that's only my personal opinion, but that's what I think of the new draft format. If you haven't tried it out yet, you definitely should. And in particular, if you didn't like Theros or Born of the Gods because it was too swingy or too brutal from time to time, then Journey into Nyx might be for you. And to underline that, I want to show you something which I discovered. Of course, I'm not the only one, but it's finally possible to draft control decks in Journey into Nyx Limited. That means that we are looking at decks that generate a lot of card advantage, that do a lot of scrying to generate virtual card advantage, that try to get as many 2-for-1 trades as possible. And lo and behold, I'm talking about 18 land decks that I'm opting to draw first with, something that is pretty much unheard of in this format up until now. So with that said, I'm going to show you just in chronological order 3 of the decks that kind of put me into this control direction, and which I was surprised by with their power level basically. And one of the most important cards in these archetypes is Sigiled Starfish, and blue is kind of the best color to build these kind of decks, with the Starfish just giving you the late game that you want. Now when I say control decks, I don't necessarily mean Esper control as in constructed, but I'm talking about a deck with 18 lands, with not a lot of attackers. I have these 0/3s, Guardians of Meletis, Opaline Unicorn, not even anything to really win the game with. But on the other hand, I have super high amount of spells, and in fact Flurry of Horns and 2 Rise of the Eagles as cards that just put 2 creatures into play. So it's kind of like generating card advantage with a single spell. I'm pretty sure that this deck isn't built 100% correctly. I really wanted to try out Knowledge and Power because I had the 2 Starfish. That was just something that I couldn't pass up on. And the cards I'm actually most unsure about are these 3 blue instants here, because this deck generates so little tempo, it can't really use the Sudden Storm too effectively. On the other hand, Dissolve and Sudden Storm, which might be the weakest cards, do scry and will always do something at least. So what this deck is lacking is probably 1 Divination or a card to effect. But at this age, I wasn't really knowing what I'm doing. I was just forcing Sigil Starfish and then going from there. When have you ever seen me leave a Deepwater Hypnotist in the sideboard? I'm pretty sure it hasn't been often the case. I'm not playing Nullify, and of course not the Stratus Walk, not in an 11 creature deck. I don't remember if I drew first with this deck. I'm pretty sure that you could just play first. Also, you want to get the tempo of the Sigiled Starfish going as soon as possible. You don't have an awful ton of removal, but Pin to the Earth, Riddle of Lightning, Curse of the Swine are really good answers to huge creatures as well. And once you get scrying, you basically draw so much more gas than your opponent, and you can just put, once you have 4 lands, you just put lands on the bottom and you will still naturally draw some, and that just means that you draw an average of, I don't know, half a spell more than your opponent in 1 or 2 draw steps. So it's really potent as long as your opponent isn't off to a super fast start, and this is where more of the early defense comes in, and of course you do need a bit of early plays. Looking back at this deck, I think that I should have picked up more 2-drops, maybe an Omen Speaker or something like that, but otherwise I was very happy with how this deck performed. Also note that Flame Speaker Adept is pretty much insane in this kind of deck, especially with the 2 Starfish. And also once I had Knowledge and Power going, which is a bit difficult, it was also really, really good. Rise of Eagles is kind of one of the best 6-drops you can have in these kind of decks, by the way. Alright, let's move to the next deck. I actually made a folder. Let's see if that works. Yep, and as you can see, I prepared 3 decks to show you today. The second one is what you would probably call Esper in Limited. I'm splashing a Scholar of Athreos with Unknown Shores, a Plains, and a Temple of Enlightenment. This deck only has 17 lands, but I'll show you why in a second. Even though I'm splashing a card and there is a 6 and a 7-drop in this deck, it is the only 2 cards that cost more than 4. This is the first reason. And the next thing is that I can easily draw first with this deck, and I'm drawing towards 3 Omen Speakers, which is pretty insane. The 3 Omen Speakers are kind of the replacement for the lack of Sigilled Starfish in this build. Scholar of Athreos, clearly an insane inclusion in this kind of deck. 3 Nyx Infusions, a card that I'm picking up a lot higher now that I know that drafting control is viable and you need removal in these kind of decks. 2 Weight of the Underworld, 2 Griptide, Interbreed the Signs, and Faded Return. So really a die-hard control deck, even less creatures than the other one. The other one had 11, but also 3 sorceries that generated creatures. This one has 10, and none of them are really good at attacking. So I guess Hour of Need is a finisher, and Faded Return is as well. One thing that I did with this deck was to often take out at least 1 Griptide or one of the removal spells that I knew wasn't doing anything. I also sometimes took out Hour of Need or one of the expensive cards, depending on the matchup. And I often brought in Thassa's Bounty because with so much control, it was often better to not even try to Griptide creatures, but to instead just play all the removal and then draw more cards. Even milling my opponent, sometimes not irrelevant with Faded Return, and another option at card advantage, although Interbreed the Signs also performed really nicely. Pull from the Deep would have been cute, but most of the spells in the non-creatures in this deck are actually enchantments, so it's not even that great of a card, and I also didn't want to overdo it. If you want to sideboard for certain matchups, you can even bring an Eye Gouge against early aggression. Pillar of War, a nice blocker for intimidate creatures, always good to keep in mind. But that's pretty much the main idea. You just don't let your opponent do anything relevant for basically forever, and then your spells will take over after a while. And the Omen Speakers are almost as good at this as the Starfish. They are better at blocking early, but a bit worse, of course, because they don't give you the scry every single turn. So this is a really very much the draw first deck that I envision when I talk about control in this format. All right, time for deck number 3, which is once again blue-black. The decks I'm showing you today are all blue-black, and that's because of the Starfish and the scry theme. I also think that black-green control is very viable, so that gives you blue-red and blue-black, then black-green and black-white as the 4 main control colors to play. And black-white is usually a bit more enchantment themed with the Grim Guardians, and of course you won't have the Starfish, which makes a big difference. So this is once again, you can see that this draft was inspired by what I learned from the previous ones. Of course, Nighthauler, a pretty great inclusion. Once again, valuing these kind of effects very highly. Nyx Infusion, Drown in Sorrow, Divination. But also, yeah, just picking up solid creatures. I also decided that I wanted more card draw than I had in the other deck, so I played 2 Thassa's Bounty, and once again a Fated Return made it into my deck. Not a card that people value very highly, so I was just really happy to have it. It's great for this kind of deck here. Thassa's Devourer is a card that's really only in there because it has a high toughness. Sometimes you want to mill your opponent a bit. I have a small milling theme going on, which makes Fated Return better. It's yeah, it's just a solid card in this deck that wants to have some high toughness blockers anyway. Looking at the sideboard, Nullify and Annul are pretty much the cards that I want to bring in depending on the matchup. And other than that, Guardians of Meletis, just like, well, or also Bronze Sable, cards I will always happily bring in against aggro and especially against Intimidate. So yeah, that's pretty much my new love in the format. Summarizing, the format is just a turn slower, which makes all the difference in the world. You can now really do what you want and you won't get punished so severely. That opens up the possibility to draft control decks, 3 of which I've shown. Lots of spells, little creatures, lots of lands, often wanting to draw first, and just taking over the late game with pretty much unbeatable spell power and of course repetitive scrying. And if you aren't into that, there is still all the other color combinations which play quite tempo-y or even aggressively. So for example, blue-green, you always want to be a tempo deck. Red-white, you still want to be aggro. Black-red, you still want to be aggro, of course. It's just that I prefer the control decks if I have the choice. And also, yeah, I've just been really happy with this approach. That's it for me for today. And yeah, I've prepared a draft as always. I hope you're enjoying the show. Leave your feedback in the comments here at mtgoacademy.com. Until then, see you next time. Bye.